Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church. And I'm here today to talk more about who is Jesus. This is the second week I've been talking about this. And today we come to a passage in the Gospel of John that's a very important passage, but it's also a very controversial one. Let me read it to you, and then we'll see if we can make some sense out of it. In John chapter 14, verses 6 and 7, Jesus says this to his disciples: I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. If you really had known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Well, this passage is what's known theologically as the exclusiveness of the gospel. And what it's really saying is simply the only way to get to God is through Jesus. Now, immediately that upsets some folks. I mean, there are lots of people who are religious, there are lots of people who are spiritual, and that has nothing to do with Jesus in many cases. There are lots of religions that believe in either someone else, like Islam, or in lots of gods and deities, like Hinduism and Shintoism and Buddhism. But Jesus is saying here, if you want to find God, you got to go through me. Now, he's not trying to put down everybody else. He's not trying to say, this is how important I am. He's simply saying that the relationship with God and man goes through him. Now, what does it go through? Well, his death on the cross. But that's a different piece than what we have just here. So Jesus is saying, if you want to get close to God, you have to get close to him. Now, in the context that he said this, he's saying it to Jews, and Jews believe in Yahweh, the giver of the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, the God of the Hebrews, who brought them out of bondage from Egypt, and for 6,000 years or so had been their God. And when the Old Testament was written, people didn't realize there was a universal God. They thought that each place kind of had its own gods. And in fact, the plagues in Egypt were really plagues on Egyptian gods, each one of those. It was as though God was saying to the Egyptians and to Pharaoh, I'm not just the God of the desert, I'm the God of everywhere. Well, today, God is in fact the God of everywhere. I remember reading a story of Bishop Tutu from South Africa, who was at an ecumenical meeting, and there was a Hindu on one side and a Muslim on the other side of him. And the preacher was talking about this passage. And Bishop Tutu was known for having a real sense of humor and being a jovial guy, but a really strong Christian. And at some point, the preacher said something like, hey, you better follow Jesus or you're in trouble. And the story goes that Bishop Tutu poked the 2 guys on the side and said, hey, he's talking about you. I don't need to apologize for what Jesus is saying here. He says, if you had realized who I was, you'd know this was true. And granted, it was hard for the apostles and the disciples to figure out this man Jesus. But now we have 2,000 years. And more importantly, we have information after the death and resurrection. No man has ever been resurrected in the fashion that Jesus was. And in all of his teachings, he says one thing that differentiates him from every other religion. He's saying that God came down to man to bring man into a relationship with him by way of Jesus' sacrifice. Every other religion in the world works on the premise that man has to try and reach up to God. I think that sets Christianity apart. Now, you don't have to agree with me, but I want to say that, do you know there's a God who loves you? Jesus says here, from now on, you know the Father and you've seen him. Why? Because you've seen Jesus. Now, do you know the Father? Have you seen him? I don't care what religion you practice. The question remains the same. Does your religion, does your worship or non-worship actually enable you to see God? I think if you look at that question deeply enough, you'll find the truth of this passage. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you want to know the truth, then look to Jesus. If you want to have life in its fullness, then look to Jesus. If you want to know the way to live and the way to eternal life, then look to Jesus. I hope you've done that. If you haven't, I invite you to try it. What have you got to lose? Well, you think about it. Hope you have a wonderful day. And if you have a need or something we can help with, then please call us. We'll do whatever we can as fast as we can to help meet your need. Thanks so much for listening. God bless you. I'll be back tomorrow with another thought about who is Jesus.